Good evening, everybody. Here we are at the end of October 2022. And October, as I mentioned last week, is known as the World Menopause Awareness Month. And of course, a lot of information is about raising awareness of the menopause and the impact it has on women's lives, especially in the workplace. But for me, what I'm trying to give advice on is to help to minimize the symptoms that you may experience. So I thought you'd be particularly interested in a new study that's only just been published this month in the North American Menopause Society Journal around the impact of a specific study and a diet that was followed over a 12-week period that significantly reduced the incidence of moderate to severe hot flashes. Now, I want to go into a little bit more detail around the diet and the things that I think were actually the bit that made the difference. And you'd have seen from the heading, if you read the heading that I put here, I think it's particularly around the impact of the soya. But let me just tell you a little bit more about this. So this study only followed 84 women, which is a really, really small scale study. So of course, whenever something like this is published, the findings, they'll always say in the conclusions that, a much larger scale study is required. But this study on 84 women were those who were postmenopausal up to the age of about 65 and experienced 2 or more moderate to severe hot flushes, or hot flashes as they can be called, every single day. So these women were selected, and half the group were put into what we call the intervention study that followed a particular diet, and the other half continued doing the same diet that they've always done, no particular changes. They all continued to do the same sort of exercise and lifestyle programs that they'd followed. And they both actually took a B12 supplement. And my view is the reason for this is because the intervention group on the special diet was following a vegan diet. And we know that those that follow a vegan diet and have no animal products in the diet have a very, very low intake of B12 because it is really predominantly found in animal foods. So let me tell you more about this specific diet, and let me pick out the bits that I think are the most relevant, particularly based on what I spoke about on last week's topic, if you watched that. Now, this diet, the intervention group, followed a low-fat, vegan, soya-rich diet. Now, the only specific requirement, obviously it had to be vegan, absolutely no animal products in the diet at all, but they were actually provided with 86 grams of soya. They were given the 86 grams of soya beans that they had to cook and eat every single day. They were asked to follow a low-fat diet. Now, bearing in mind it's vegan anyway, so they were asked to follow a low-fat diet, which would have been low fat in oils like olive oil or any other oils they may have eaten. They weren't given any more specification, or nuts and seeds, because those are the fats that will be in a vegan diet. They were asked to minimize. They weren't giving any specific recommendations as to how much to include or how little to include, but it was to minimize. And of course it was vegan, but they didn't actually say anything else around the amount of plants, plant-based foods, what foods like cruciferous vegetables or anything else like that at all. That's all we know about it. There was no obligation to eat anything other than those 86 grams of soya. If you follow a vegan diet, it doesn't mean you're going to be plant-based. You could be eating loads of pasta, wheat-based pasta with a cheap soya, cheap tomato-based sauce. There's no other information that they were asked to follow. Now, the findings were very interesting. So 59%, this was over a 12-week period, by the way. So after this, when they recorded their findings, 59% of those in this intervention diet had complete cessation of hot flashes. They completely stopped. 59%, that's really significant. Overall, there was an 84% reduction in the severity and the frequency of the hot flashes. So really good outcomes from this. So, the immediate thought would be, right, that's the diet to follow. I should be vegan. I should have a vegan diet, plant-based, low fat. And without paying too much attention to this, you may suddenly think, oh yeah, plant-based and low fat, and that's the way to go, without really thinking about the soya. So I want to talk to you about what I pick up from this, and it's about the role of phytoestrogens in the diet. Now, before I get into the specifics about phytoestrogens, let me just explain it. In the Far East cultures, traditional cultures, like in Japan and China, they have a diet that's very, very rich in soya, but particularly the fermented soya types, which is natto, miso, and tempeh, not the unfermented soy that we tend to eat in the Western world. Natto, tempeh, and miso, the main ones are going to be eating. There's probably other fermented soya types that are available. They're the main ones that I know. And we know that in these cultures that the incidence of hot flushes and other menopausal symptoms is actually very, very low. Now, a more recent study that was published in the early part of this century, I'm not sure how long ago it was, I haven't written the date, but it was a study that was done over the changing diet in the latter part of the 20th century, from 1980 to 2000, and how in the Japanese diet in particular, this is what they looked at, was that there was a much greater introduction of Western style foods, and therefore there was a reduction in soya type foods, and how there was quite a significant incident of hot flashes from 15% to 40% of menopausal women. So as the soya declined and the Western style diet increased, hot flashes started to increase. And we know that soya acts as a phytoestrogen, and phytoestrogen literally means plant estrogen. It's a food that has that mimics natural estrogen in the body. So what do we know about hormones and how they work in the body? They act as a lock and key. So when you think about estrogen, we've got receptors in the body that need estrogen. They have cells in the body that need estrogen. They have little receptors, and the estrogen can only lock onto those specific receptors that need the estrogen. So every hormone needs a different type of lock and key mechanism, and that's how hormones work in the body. And when the estrogen locks onto those specific receptors on cells that need estrogen, they exert an influence on that cell. They help the body to act in a certain way. That's what hormones do. Now, what happens with phytoestrogens is they mimic real natural estrogen. And what they do is they are able, with that lock and key action, to lock on those receptors that need estrogen. And they lock onto those, even though they're not the natural estrogen that we have in the body, they mimic natural estrogen. And what they do is they exert a very mild, but still in the same, they are exerting an influence on the cell in an estrogenic way. That's what phytoestrogens do, and that is what soya do. And we know that as hot flashes are a direct result of a loss of estrogen, then if we can provide sources of plant-based estrogens that can mimic it, this is why phytoestrogens, you might have heard the term before, can be so useful to women. So for me, the outcome from this study mainly is regarding the soya, the fact that they were given 86 grams of soya to eat every single day without really having a direct effect on the rest of the diet, other than say it needs to be vegan and take out animal foods. It needs to be low fat, but without really monitoring how much fat should be eaten. Now, I still stick to my previous information I gave last week about fats in the diet. We need fats in the diet. I don't believe in the low fat approach. And we need the fats, specifically the nuts and the seeds and avocados and olives and olive oil, which are all plant-based, but also the oily fish as well for the really important EPA, DHA type fats. I don't believe that the outcome of this study to do with the reduction in hot flashes was to do with the low fat impact at all. In fact, I think longer term, other symptoms would come to the surface that I've spoken about. This was just a 12-week study, which is great results, but I don't think it was to do with the low fat. And surely the higher plant-based diet was relevant. And as I said, yes, high plant-based diet is very, very important. I encourage everybody to have a plant-based diet. Plant-based diet does not mean that you cannot have any animal foods in it. You have to exclude meats, you have to exclude eggs, you have to exclude fish. I think there is a place for all these foods in the diet in moderation. But I think the diet must be plant-based. We need a lot of vegetables and other plant-based foods in the diet. Doesn't have to be vegan. And do bear in mind when we think about this, that some of these other foods that were in this study were plant-based foods, and these are phytoestrogen rich foods. They're plant-based, and some of these you'll see are actually higher fat content type foods. So you wouldn't want to be reducing these from a phytoestrogen point of view. Just to give you this list of foods, the particularly rich phytoestrogen rich foods are flax seeds, sesame seeds, chickpeas, lentils and other pulses, oats, garlic, cruciferous vegetables. You know, these are the broccoli and the cauliflower and sprouts and kale, celery, sunflower seeds and almonds. So quite a few of those are nuts and seeds, which are fattier foods. We need these in the food. So my view on all of this is, yes, eat some soya based foods. I would prefer that people ate the fermented soya. That's the natto, tempeh and miso. A little bit of tofu is okay. I think the fermented foods are much better for us, but that's another topic in its own right, which I've covered a long time ago. And do make sure that of those phytoestrogen rich foods, you are eating a selection of these every single day. Don't just think, oh, I've had a little bit of flaxseed on my breakfast in the morning, or, oh, I've had a bit of celery at lunchtime in a salad. You know, we need to be looking at these foods and encouraging us to eat a lot more of these in the diet, a wide variety. Everything in moderation, and as much variety as possible is really, really important. Do keep up a wide variety of plants. They're rich in fiber. They have prebiotic benefits, which means they feed the beneficial gut bacteria that we need to look after all the time. They have antioxidant properties and much, much more health properties overall. So that's my overall take on this. Soya is important. All the other phytoestrogen rich foods are important. That's my understanding of why this particular study was so successful, because of the phytoestrogens in this soya. Eat plenty of plant-based foods, but it doesn't have to be vegan to get the benefit from this. A little bit of animal food, a little bit of saturated fat is okay, but it's how much of it you eat and how much of the vegetable plant-based diet, and particularly the phytoestrogen rich foods, is really important too. And please, please, please don't go for a low fat diet. We need to keep good fats rich in our diet overall. And as I said last week, these fats do not make us fat at all. So I hope you found that interesting. Any ideas on topics that you'd like me to discuss, please add it in the comments below. If you found this enjoyable, do let me know, add some comments below. And if you want to find last week's topic, easily find last week's topic and all my other talks that I've done over the past 2.5, getting on for 3 years now. You can find all of these in my YouTube channel, Peyton Principles Natural Health. Please go over and subscribe. You'll get immediate notification every time a new video is added. So all these lives are added as videos, and so are my little snippets of videos that I put onto Instagram, 1 minute long. These are also all added to YouTube now. So go and check them out. They're short and sharp, the 1 minute ones, but all of these videos are 15-20 minutes at the most. You'll find loads of really valuable information.